Hello again. There was in the early 1970s a craze for various strange authors, people sometimes described as being fringe. Well, politely described as being fringe. A lot of people refer to them as crackpots. I'm thinking about those like the supposed Tibetan Lama, T. Lobsang Rampa. Older viewers might remember such classics as The Third Eye. Lobsang Rampa's real name was, of course, Cyril Hoskin, and he was no more Tibetan than I am. Another tremendously popular writer at that time was Immanuel Velikovsky, the titles of whose books sound like science fiction movies from the 1950s. Worlds in Collision, Earth in Upheaval, Ages in Chaos, and so on. I read all three of those books as popular paperbacks, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. Worlds in Collision really was a cult book. At one time, it was the best-selling non-fiction book in the entire world, apart from the Bible. Although his books are centered around things like planetary catastrophes, such as Venus nearly crashing into the Earth, as though the two planets were balls in a game of cosmic snooker, Velikovsky was not an astronomer, but a psychiatrist. He was also a Jew, and his books were an attempt to explain some of the biblical miracles like manna in the wilderness and the sun standing still at Joshua's command. So really he was looking for a rational and naturalistic explanation for biblical miracles. In the description to this video I give a link to the Wikipedia page about this strange man. There was a time when everybody was reading, had read, or was about to read Worlds in Collision. The reason for the extraordinary popularity of the book, which as I say was the most read non-fiction book in the whole world for years, might prove educative for those currently trying to stop certain ideas from being spread on the internet. In 1950, Velikovsky, who was a Russian psychiatrist living in America, found a publisher for his first book, Worlds in Collision. Macmillan, the big publishing house, brought out an edition that year, and this is when we see the problems of trying to denounce and suppress something as being unscientific and dangerous nonsense. The ideas that are put forward in Worlds in Collision are completely mad. Velikovsky claims that Venus had not only been around just for about 3,500 years, and that it wasn't a planet at all, but a giant comet which had been ejected from Jupiter. He suggests that Venus careened around the solar system, coming close enough to Earth to scatter hydrocarbons into our atmosphere, which were somehow converted into carbohydrates and fell from the sky as the manna which fed the Israelites when they were in the wilderness, which we read about in the Old Testament book of Exodus. Now, this is all unscientific nonsense. Had Macmillan just published the book and nobody had said anything, it would probably have been almost immediately forgotten. What happened, though, was that the head of the Harvard Observatory, a famous astronomer called Harlow Shapley, became furiously angry that such a book should be published, and since Macmillan also published many textbooks and academic works, Shapley organised a boycott by universities and other places, meaning that if Macmillan did not drop Velikovsky at once, then many other authors and organisations would withdraw their custom from Macmillan. Macmillan caved in and ditched Velikovsky and Worlds in Collision, and this is when the book began soaring up the bestseller lists. Comparisons were made with the treatment of the Inquisition of Galileo, and people began to describe Immanuel Velikovsky as a persecuted man, a modern-day heretic who was being driven to distraction by orthodox science. Of course, the difference is that Galileo was quite right about the Earth orbiting the Sun, but Velikovsky was not at all correct about Venus being a huge comet ejected by Jupiter. For many people, though, the whole thing was seen as very fishy. What was orthodox science hiding? Why were scientists so keen to stop people reading Worlds in Collision? Were they afraid of the truth coming out? This is, of course, precisely what we are seeing happening these days when somebody comes up with a heterodox view of COVID, racism, or anything else. There is a mad rush by the orthodox to attack and suppress what is being said, and this causes many ordinary people to suspect that the reason the idea is being buried by the mainstream media or government is that it is true, and they don't want everybody to know about it. In short, this kind of thing is counterproductive and acts like the Streisand effect to bring far more attention to whatever it is than if everybody had simply ignored it. I'm seeing a lot of this kind of thing lately, and it is very amusing. In most cases, it is based upon the same motives as were used in the attempt to prevent publication of Velikovsky's work, and the end result is almost invariably the same. That is to say, far more publicity is generated for the crank idea than would have been the case if it was simply ignored.